Thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. Whenever you are connected to an unsecured Wi-Fi, you are sending information out into the digital world that can be intercepted by third parties. With ExpressVPN, all the data you send and receive goes through an encrypted tunnel, and this protects you from hackers trying to steal your private information. If you are someone who cares about privacy, ExpressVPN masks your IP address and protects you from third parties collecting and using your data for various purposes such as targeted advertising. Now, depending on which country you are in, some content could be unavailable or restricted in your country. ExpressVPN gives you unrestricted access. All you have to do is to change your location to another country to gain access. Whether you want to hide your identity, pretend you're in another country, or simply want a secured connection, you can get ExpressVPN free for your first 3 months if you use my link in the description below. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, China and Vietnam are among the 5 remaining communist countries in the world, alongside North Korea, Laos, and Cuba. These states claim they have not achieved communism and refers to themselves as socialist states, whatever that means. Both communist countries had poor state-led economies, and it was during Deng's era that China decided to embrace capitalism. Vietnam soon followed suit. In terms of GDP per capita, China is richer than Vietnam. Although both countries claim to be socialist states, they have high degrees of income inequality. China and Vietnam should have become natural allies due to their shared ideological beliefs. The Soviet Union and China even helped North Vietnam fight against South Vietnam and the Americans during the Vietnam War. However, that isn't the case. You see, in 1979, China invaded Vietnam following Vietnam's invasion of Khmer Rouge-controlled Cambodia. At that time, Vietnam was an ally of the Soviet Union, while China wasn't on good terms with the Soviets and supported Cambodia. Following the war, a series of border clashes ensued between the two countries. In recent years, tensions have renewed due to the maritime disputes in the South China Sea. As a result, Vietnam is improving relations with the United States. Some of you may be led to believe that both communist countries hate the West, but due to tensions with China, the vast majority of Vietnamese people have a negative opinion towards China. While only 10% of Vietnamese have a favorable view of China in 2017, more than 80% of Vietnamese have a favorable view of the United States. This is even much higher than some democratic countries like Singapore with close military ties to the United States. Both China and Vietnam are authoritarian one-party states, each with their fair share of human rights abuses. However, Vietnamese people do generally enjoy a higher degree of political rights and civil liberties as compared to the Chinese. Both countries have low freedom of press and government censorship. But the censorship in Vietnam is not as bad when compared to China's firewall. The Vietnamese population still have access to foreign websites and media, thereby making the average Vietnamese more politically aware when it comes to global affairs. You see, communists don't really like religion, which is why the Chinese Communist Party is officially atheist. This is supported by the persecution of religious groups like Falun Gong, Tibetan Buddhism, Uyghur Muslims, Christians, and so on. This is also why China rewrites the Bible and Quran to include socialist values. If you are a Christian in China, Xi Jinping comes first before Jesus. Therefore, it is not surprising that China is one of the least religious countries, with 75% of Chinese not having a religion. In comparison, Vietnam is more religious, and the average Vietnamese enjoy a higher degree of religious freedom. Additionally, the Chinese government ranks good and bad citizens via a social credit system. As of now, there is no unified scoring system. This means that Beijing's scoring system is different from Shanghai's scoring system, but generally, your scores would determine your rewards and punishments. Vietnam's government, being authoritarian, could implement a similar system, but currently there is no such system in Vietnam. Although both countries have their own propaganda and patriotic education, Vietnam's leader Ho Chi Minh once said, "Everything depends on the Americans. If they want to make peace, we shall make peace and invite them to tea afterwards." As a result, Vietnam's post-war mentality is very different from China's victim mentality. The Chinese call it the century of humiliation when China was invaded by Western powers, including the Soviet Union and Japan. So while Vietnam teaches forgiveness, Chinese kids are taught revenge and hatred since kindergarten.
那你长大了想干什么呢？
想杀日本人，想杀美国人。
好，回去吧，坐着吧。
This also explains why Chinese films love to hate on Japan and show Japanese getting slaughtered. Both countries are riddled with corruption, with China being slightly less corrupt than Vietnam. However, in China, the line between fighting corruption and purging political enemies is often blurred, which explains such voting results in China's National People's Congress. Although Vietnam suffers from the same problem, there is still some form of pluralism and meritocracy in Vietnam's politics. If you just compare the buildings, you'll notice that buildings in Vietnam are colorful and vibrant, whereas buildings in China are mostly grayish. This is likely a result of French influence and the Vietnamese people's liberal approach to suit their personal taste, while in China, homogeneity is emphasized.